Hello, Elden Ring fans. It's me, Satan. A couple weeks ago, I was doing what I normally do every night, counting all the millions of dollars in ad revenue that my Elden Ring air quotes critique made. Usually, by the time I'm done, YouTube has sent over the next helicopter full of money and I get to start all over again. It's how I spend most of my time these days, sitting in front of my computer with 3 monitors on, not working on the Witcher 3 video. The central one has the Elden Ring critique on repeat 24/7 because I love hearing the sound of my own voice. The second has the comments updating in real time so I can always see what people are saying about it. And the third are the daily stream of emails I receive from Miyazaki himself begging me to take the video down because it's ruining Game of the Year 2022's reputation. Anyway, I was about to zip up for the night when a new batch of comments came in. Apparently, the game was being patched and they were adding Torrent to the Elden Beast fight. Even though I wasn't the only one to say that the horse felt missing from that boss, I still took full immediate credit for it and just know it's because every single person at FromSoft has watched my video multiple times, crying, "You're welcome, this change was coming as part of an expansion that was about to be released, and I had no idea about this. I only played Elden Ring so I could make a video on it for clout because it was the hot popular game at the time. I had no plans on even playing Shadow of the Erdtree and hadn't even heard of it, but then the comments changed for a second time. Turns out I was right all along. Again, as I always am, the boss design of the DLC had only made things worse from the approach they had taken in the first game. People were miserable. Fights were too hard, too unreadable, too unreactable, and Joseph Anderson was prophetic and correct, and the video aged like wine and stands the test of time, and so on. I'd say it's my favorite feeling, but it happens so often that I'm mostly used to it by now. Mostly. So I sipped on Twitter in celebration and thought that'd be the end of it. For the first time in my life, I was wrong. The comments kept coming, then emails, then Twitter DMs, Reddit DMs, the worst kind. People started stopping me in the street to tell me how right I was and that they were sorry they hadn't seen how bad it had gotten. My kids keep asking me why so many people want to shake my hand, and so I decided I had to see for myself before From had a chance to patch the game out of the mess they had made. I wanted the raw, horrifically awful base experience of Shadow of the Erdtree. Not for my own enjoyment, because let's be real, I don't enjoy anything about these games, and I never have, and not even to make a video. I just wanted to bask in the warm glory of being right. So I downloaded the expansion and unplugged my Ethernet cord so that day one train wreck could live on for my whole playthrough, crashing over and over. Having finished the DLC now, I can objectively say that FromSoft has hit a new low, and they were already pretty far down, so this is like breaking into Ash Lake after thinking the boss design Blighttown was rock bottom in the base game. How I long for that FromSoft to return now, because what we have to tolerate today is a shadow of its former self. I'd say they've lost the plot. If their games had any, they've painted themselves into a corner now since deciding they live in a world without criticism. The DLC's design is soulless and hollow, the series has been wrung out, and whoever is in charge is an old king overdue to be put out to field. But they won't. They'll stick around until all the blood is bored out of the fans, too afraid to speak up, and will inevitably die twice. Once now, as the actually astute among us notice the decline and will be ignored, and a second time when you all finally catch up to us and realize that this was the moment of downfall. And if you had only been brave enough to admit to some shortcomings, then things could have been different. But now there's only ashes left to watch blow away. Demon Souls, I didn't want to make this video, but I can't resist rubbing it in. I will now proceed to relentlessly complain about every single thing wrong in this DLC, which is a lot, for the next 70 minutes. I will also provide the easily impressionable masses with the correct opinion. My opinion, which will from this day forward be parroted on every message board as fact about this game's quality, and in 100 other videos, all with a variant of broken masterpiece in the title. Just to annoy you, specifically, and this is your fault, because I warned you, if you try to block me, you can only make me stronger. Father Geralt, forgive me. This is Phase 2. Alright, so that should have gone on long enough to scare off the type of people it was making fun of. Let's begin for real. Spoilers for Elden Ring and all of the DLC, of course. 2 years ago, I made that critique video, and it was probably the best received of the big ones that I've ever done. You know, the videos where I give credit to the big latest release for being great, but also don't shy away from a good chunk of what I think is legitimate criticism, like Breath of the Wild, God of War, Mario Odyssey. Usually this type of content triggers a big backlash counterattack, even though it wasn't my intention to attack anything or anybody. But I get it, truly, I can come across as really negative sometimes, often more than I actually am, and people love their video games. I do too, we're passionate, it's fine. The Elden Ring critique wasn't like that. It followed an inversion of the usual response. Most people today are more willing to admit the shortcomings in Breath of the Wild and Odyssey, for example, whereas they were frothingly adamant that the games were flawless at release. Meanwhile, most people agreed with my Elden Ring video when it came out. Gonna get a bunch of comments about that, but I'm sorry, it's true. They really did. It got a lot of support, but over time, some of them have returned to say they no longer do so. Said another way, the fanbase at large seemed to agree with most of my criticism near release, and a significant portion of them have since gradually shifted conclusions to that the problems they thought were in the game aren't that big of a deal anymore, or don't exist at all and never did, and they had to play the game some more to figure it out, or are the players' faults, or maybe even my fault, not the game's. My first video, like most things that are created, has a few mistakes in it. I'm going to talk more about them and the response it has gotten toward the end of this one, but considering how infamous that critique has become in some circles, it didn't feel right to begin here without acknowledging that. The fake intro also wasn't a complete lie because I really wasn't going to play this expansion at release until the torrent change news exposed me to so many comments complaining about the DLC's boss design and how much From had doubled down on all of the issues I had pointed out in the base game. In fact, I haven't played a proper video game since December, I think. It piqued my curiosity too much to ignore, and then I really did want to play the initial launch version of these fights to see what all the fuss was about after that. And this is where things might get a touch awkward because I know exactly what some people are expecting from me here. Validation about those issues, biting criticism about how the fights are too hard and have strayed too far from the fundamentals of punishing but always fair, in an attempt to still provide a difficult, rewarding experience to a player base that has an incredible amount of banked mastery and improvement by now, gained from the previous games that are like this: Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Souls-like imitators, and so on. Sorry, you know what I'm talking about if you're still listening. This is a waste of time. It really pains me to do this. The FromSoft player base has become the absolute worst fan group in video games since the release of Elden Ring. Just the most incessantly obnoxious group of people that feel like they're defending an insulted family member when you say the slightest word wrong in the proximity of their beloved video game. They speak like a Pokemon named Get Good that evolves into Skill Issue, so I know full well how much shit I'm going to get for this in the long term, but I have enough history with these games that I feel compelled to do it anyway. I feel like I owe it in some way since this series is what I launched my channel with. I loved Shadow of the Erdtree. I think it's a big step in the right direction from vanilla Elden Ring and has been a huge relief for me to go through. While there is undoubtedly some unfairness in some of the fights and many problems in the exploration and the world, I had a blast overall, and I was sad when it ended. Dare I say it, I had a yabba dabba do time, and I wouldn't be bothering to make this video right now if I hadn't. I think this is the best DLC FromSoft has made, because Sekiro didn't get one. Now, having made that comparison with the DLC from the other games, I must rush to point out the price difference. 40 USD is a steal for this in my opinion, but it is still so much more than the previous DLC packs and closer to a full price game. So it's a little rough to compare. The best one to put next to it is, unexpectedly, all 3 of the individual editions Dark Souls 2 got viewed as a combined package. Next would be doing the same for the Duo DLC that Dark Souls 3 received. Even when doing that, I still think Shadow of the Erdtree comes out on top. If Old Hunters or Artorias of the Abyss were twice as big and twice as expensive and kept the quality up the whole entire time, then maybe that wouldn't be true. Yeah, sorry, I wonder if it's a new group of people that hate me now. How dare I? So does that mean the Shattered Masterpiece has been repaired, reforged? It crushed a rune arc. Take down all those YouTube videos with all those titles. Am I back on the Elden Ring train? Choo-choo. What about my thoughts on the base game? Well, it's a bit complicated. I don't think it's true that I have mixed feelings on most of these games anymore. My view has matured to being strongly positive, with some clear flaws that I know exist and wish weren't there, but I still adore the games. For example, Dark Souls 1 is an amazing work of art and one of my favorite games of all time, but everything after Big ONS makes me want to quit, and I have, and do quit at that exact spot on so many playthroughs. The DLC can become an alternate end path for that game since the quality is so high, and eerily, I wonder if that's what's going to happen to Elden Ring for me from now on. However, there are other problems that are on this level that I want to get into, but I also want to try my best to avoid the whole, oh my god, best game ever, here are 20 reasons why it sucks script style that I can fall into. And having finished the script now, and I'm recording this part much later, I feel like I kind of fell into that trap again, but let's let it ride and see what happens. I played the entire base game again on a fresh character for Shadow of the Erdtree. Even though it's not my favorite, I went with a double Colossal Sword build because the slow weapon speed was an issue I had before, and I thought it would be a good test to use that same approach in the DLC. So no summons, no magic, no ash spirits, just me, my weapons, and the boss. Those weapons had also apparently been buffed a few times, in particular for recovery times after swinging them since I last played, and I wanted to see how that felt. It took me about 50 hours to go through all of the base game zones, side dungeons, legacy dungeons, and bosses. I tried to sort of emulate a blind first playthrough and did most of the content again. I didn't do any grinding, in fact I got a little impatient and ran through a couple of zones toward the end, and I was level 158 when I got to the new content. This feels about right since you can't access it without getting too near the end of the game. It took me 40 hours to beat the DLC, 5 hours of which were spent just on the final boss, which means he takes the crown as the longest I've ever spent trying to beat a fight in one of these games. It also means the DLC all on its own is comparable in length to some full-release Souls-likes, and that's pretty awesome. I don't know if this is going to be worthwhile, but here's the path I took in the DLC as a reference, since it's so non-linear and can be approached in many different ways. That's Elden Ring for you. Hopefully it's interesting at least, and if you don't think so, you can just skip to the next chapter in the timeline below. I explored the starting area a little bit, killed the first furnace golem, and then went straight into the legacy dungeon Belleroot. I didn't intend to stay long, but I ended up getting sucked into completing it right then. I was at Scadu fragment level 2 and killed the dancing lion in a little under half an hour. I found it quite difficult. Afterwards, I finished exploring the starting area, did my first side content in a jail and side dungeon, and crossed the bridge toward Castle Ensis. I decided to keep exploring, however, and went down the other roads first. I found the alternative way to Scadu Altus through the Spirit Springs, landing you in a different castle. I killed the mini-boss there and found the route to the new zone, but I felt like I had skipped too much of the earlier areas to push into this one, and I didn't want a repeat of what happened to me in base Elden Ring, so I went back to Gravesite Plain. This play session ended with me finding Egon on the ground cursing some other guy named Bale. How curious. That joke doesn't make sense because that's from the Witcher 3 script. Although he won't give you any specifics about how long it's been. How curious. Non-linear joke, enjoy. Next up was a spot of Civil War when I had to kill a fellow old dragon man and found my way, surprisingly through a side dungeon, at a new zone, Jagged Peak. There were a few dragons to kill here, although I skipped Senesax because fuck that noise, and a thrilling horseback mountain climb to Bale, who turns out to also be a dragon. I was Scooby Snack level 5 and tried for over an hour to kill him until this happened to me. Twice. This, combined with my damage feeling a bit low, annoyed me enough to make like I was at Tim Hortons and roll up the rim out of there. I did try some of the new Colossal Katana weapons for a bit here though, and thought they were fun too. I was now obsessed with finding the map stone just to the north of this area, so I kept exploring and couldn't find it. I ended up in Cerulean and Charos, finding a sealed doorway at the bottom of a deep chasm, riding through the Finger Ruins down here, which were a big disappointment, thumbs down from me, and then returned to Gravesite Plain to mop up some points of interest before finally heading into Castle Ensis proper. I was Scadu level 6 for Rolana, and again it was a pretty difficult boss that took just under half an hour like the lion. Scadu Altus was next, and I did a pretty half-assed circuit of exploration, including a detour to the ancient ruins of Ra'a via the imbued sword key teleporter before my first foray into Shadow Keep. I was Scadu 7 for Golden Hippo, and it only took a couple of attempts, probably because I had already fought one as a roaming mini-boss in the southern part of the map. If you played the game, then you know Shadow Keep is quite a large area with many sublocations. I went through the courtyard-like bit after the hippo fight and found the secret way out to the flooded subzone of Altus. I followed this mostly linear path for 2 more hippo kills and a lengthy catacombs-type dungeon that surprisingly ended with a meatier-than-usual boss named Jory. The Abyssal Woods is gated behind this fight, unless there's another way here that I didn't find, and that was an even bigger surprise. I went through a bit of it right then and finally got the map stone I couldn't reach before. I wanted to unveil the entire map now, so I went back to Shadow Keep and took the westward route through a dungeon wing and across a bridge to the ancient ruins of Ra'a. I ended up clearing most of this zone, looking for a way to the map pillar thing, and not finding it. My skedaddle power reached double digits here, being 11 for the boss Ramana of the Bud, dude, and this was the only main fight of the DLC that I killed on my first try. For some reason after this, I gave up on my Mapstone quest and went back to the Abyssal Woods. I reached Midra's Manse shortly thereafter and spent 40 minutes fighting Midra himself before finally winning, which is weird because I think the Lion and Rolana are way more difficult than him. I must have kept getting caught out by some of his damaging spells, I guess, or something like that. I was still tree power 11 for this boss. In between this play session and the next, one of the creaky wheels in my head finally squeaked out a thought, and I wondered if the broken seal in that weird message that appeared when I approached Shadow Keep was referring to the door in the chasm I found earlier in the Cerulean Coast. This turned out to be correct. It was a surprise to me too, so I did that literal dungeon dive next. My Scadu amp still went to 11 for the boss here, but I began to wonder about the balancing implications of it when I absolutely melted the Putrescent Knight on my 4th attempt. I liked this boss a lot more when I fought it a second time with just a longsword and got to see its mechanics. I returned to Cerulean next to explore it more thoroughly, and then did the same for Scadu Altus right after. I did some side dungeons and found a path through a cave that led to the land at the base of Ra'a and where the trolley mapstone was located. With the map finally complete, I first admired the big tree at the top of it, it looks gorgeous, and then spent half an hour bamboozled into hitting every wall around this elevated township, and trying every angle to double jump over with torrents because a message nearby was telling me there had to be a way in somehow. I finally did get in, only to immediately, and I do mean immediately, find the hole in the wall I was meant to use when I landed on the other side. I regretted not streaming my playthrough in this moment. Sorry, chat. Would have been a good clip. A quick teleport later, fully exploring Shadowkeep was finally happening, or so I thought because it had a whole other entrance and area I hadn't found yet, so I spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to get to this ladder before giving up. I even found a glitch in an invisible wall that stops you from getting through here even if you can make the jump. Good job there, From. By the time I got to Mesmer, I was Shadow Blessing 15, but was still embraced in his flame for 35 minutes. Quite difficult. This was my second favorite fight of the DLC. I wonder if everyone knows what my favorite fight is now, having just said that. Somehow I missed one of the gaping holes in that ruined village in Altus, so I spent more time than I cared to admit trying to find the way down to this area of the map before noticing this well with a ladder and thinking, well, there must be a tunnel, and stumbling on the way forward nearby. I rode through this area, couldn't be bothered killing the armored leg furnace golem again, met the Finger Ruins guy at the church, and found the second entrance into Shadow Keep, with a new Londo Ruins watery twist. There's a lot of back and forth between areas from this point on, and this was the last major bit of exploration that happened, so I'll conclude with the final fights with bosses in quick succession. I was still Scadu 15 for Commander Gaius, and killed him the first time I managed to dodge his stupid charge at the start of the fight, which was my 4th attempt, so only a few minutes were spent here. You get 5 fragments for beating Gaius, so I was DLC level 17 for Scadu Tree Avatar. This took me way longer at almost half an hour. I met Meteor shortly after this and got a very sloppy kill in under 10 minutes. Probably didn't deserve this one, but I didn't like the fight that much, so I don't care. Much to my dismay looking back, I had forgotten about Bale and Dre, and thought that burning Mesmer's Kindling for the final stretch was all I had left. So I did that, exploring a few side areas I had missed in Ra'a while I was there, and then cleared a near Elim, or Millie Rhine as my brain insisted on reading this backwards for some reason whenever I saw it. Radahn is the final boss if you didn't know, spoiler warning was a while ago to be fair, which made my choice of armor for this playthrough unintentionally very amusing to me. The crowd goes mild about this being a returning boss from the base game though, or at least I hope it does. Or maybe the crowd is going wild because there's nothing more Elden Ring than reusing unique event status fights from the base game, right? Everyone seemed to love that. As I said earlier, I spent 5 hours fighting this guy before seeing victory, even though I had reached Scatman 19 with a set of fragments from the last area. That's a pretty big bump in fight duration. Even Bale was a baby in comparison after this, dying in under 10 minutes, but remember I had over an hour of attempts from earlier in the run that taught me a lot, so he still comfortably comes in second place for attempt numbers. He's in first place for my favorite of the expansion though, and in my heart. Good job on getting that if you guessed correctly earlier. That was my run of the DLC, and happily, all the major talking points I want to go through can be found in that summary. Nice that, almost like I planned it. Because I didn't. The 2 biggest problems I think FromSoft were facing when making this expansion were player progression and making an addition to the open world format. DLC for Dark Souls and the like has traditionally been a few more levels with a few more bosses. More of the same structure delivered at the same rhythm from the game's foundation. I suppose they could have done the same here for Elden Ring, but it wouldn't fit as well with the open world players would be coming from. Conversely, creating a second map that would be large enough to feel like you can get lost and explore, which is an important part of open world maps in my opinion, but still not balloon in size and outrun the scope into becoming a sequel instead of a DLC, would be a balancing act to maintain throughout development. And as we can see with the problems present in the game today, it was a difficult one to perform. Let's rewind for a second though. The answer to this problem is what we got, a mix of both. Technically, the Shadow Realm is an open world map, but to me it also feels like one huge open air Souls level. The legacy dungeon sections are more focused wings of this map, like dungeons within a dungeon, instead of the game's more sprawling and straightforward layout. It's a little more Zelda than base Elden Ring, and honestly is pretty damn close to how I envisioned the original game being. In my first video, I spoke about how I collected a handful of questions as I explored the game about unreachable locations, and wondering about them kept simmering as I made progress, like getting up to this big plateau in the southern part of Liurnia. You can't get there until way later in the game. In fact, I actually had given up on being able to get there and thought it was just decorative in the distance, but then Elden Ring was full of surprises. The DLC goes ham on that idea, with main content being gated behind engaging with thinking about how to get around, which routes go where, and possible bridging connections on the map, instead of it being for mostly optional content in vanilla Elden Ring. This is probably my favorite thing in the DLC. It's either that or the boss roster of way more hits than misses. That's more of an enjoyable return to From for me though, whereas this map design is something novel and interesting. I think it was a huge success in structure and rewarding the player with eureka moments, while also allowing the map to feel more substantial when it's quite a bit smaller than the lands between. It's a dense dungeon island versus the loosely interconnected continents. It gave me way more to think about and mentally work with instead of it acting as a hub for content. That's not to say that the base game is devoid of this. To be clear, some of the best parts have this same quality, just that it's at a higher concentration in the DLC. But then we have to speak about that content. First up, those Scadu fragments. How do you give players a way to continue leveling up when the majority of them will have endgame characters hitting the soft caps on many stats, have finished their builds, and therefore see runes as mostly worthless? Enter a new layer of character progression. Find these items, use them at a grace site, and get stronger on top of whatever power you've came into the DLC with. Both damage and defense scale up with the same fragments, and spirit summons become stronger with revered ashes. So does Torrent apparently, but it never felt like it to me since getting comboed off the horse is the only thing that matters, and I don't think the revered ashes helped with that at all, but maybe I just suck. These two items are very similar to golden seeds and sacred tears for your flask in vanilla. They are similarly usually placed in ostentatious locations like they've been enshrined, but for the fragments especially you can sometimes find them in more mundane places, or being carried by shadow dudes of no renown holding glowing pots, which is how I collected a few without even realizing. And I really don't feel like they should have done that, but more on that in a little bit. There are 50 Scadu tree fragments to find, with the max level of the bonus being 20, so you very quickly need more than one for each level up of this Shadow Realm blessing. The strength of this has already been increased in a patch, so instead of giving solid numbers that might be out of date by the time you hear this, I'll just say it's about double damage dealt and half damage received at max level compared to no blessing at all. There are only 25 revered ashes to find for a cap of 10 blessings, but at maximum the buff it provides is comparable in power for your summons. That means there are 75 of these pickups to find in the DLC. How many lootables do you think there are in total though? Now obviously I can't go through and count them all to make a comparison. Exactly, I can't, so we'll just have to agree that it's a small fraction of the total things that you can find. There are quite a few new weapons and armor sets, but most of these will not be applicable to most builds, which means we have the first bit of returning criticism from the base game that applies to the DLC. Exploration rewards. I think this is the most disappointing aspect of the DLC, and it isn't just about items and character progression. The worst parts of Shadow of the Erdtree feel like the very best parts of Starfield, which is a comparison no one wants to hear. Empty locations and vacant stretches of land that commit the crime of teasing that they will be far more interesting than they end up being.
What experience led you to that belief?
Let's go in order here. Items fare the best out of these issues. Weapons and armor sets and talismans are fairly common, and even though they don't always have universal appeal, they're still more fun to find than low-level smithing stones and the like. They have the potential for unlocking new builds for future runs or tempt you into making a change for the DLC. Outside of that, though, and where the findables bleed to character progression, is a missed opportunity for a new type of upgrade, an alternative progression path which, at an extreme end, could be like a much more in-depth and much more powerful Wondrous Physic Flask that I could ignore and then complain about my own choice for not using. But no, seriously, a new tier of weapon upgrades would have been great here, and a new level of Crimson Flask upgrades would have worked too. Maybe there were worries about PvP balancing or that a spike in player power would ruin the end fights of the base game, but they're bad already, and I think there could have been ways to mitigate that concern by putting limitations on the power buffs like the Scadu fragments work today. They only function in the Shadow DLC realm. It's a bit clunky, but if you're already in Clunky Town, then just kind of go crazy with it and build some more. At the very least, there should have been a new upgrade stone that allows you to improve any weapon in one shot from whatever level it is to level 25, or 10 if it's a somber version, as a cool new thing to find that also alleviates a lot of busy work in getting another weapon up to snuff. Some of these suggestions could have also been a part of breaking the endgame power boost of the Scadu fragments into smaller chunks. Like I said, the current ultimate bonus is about double damage, and I think it would have been better if a new tier of weapon upgrades and the Scadu boost still resulted in about that level of power. To reiterate, in this imagined different progression system, you would upgrade your weapon to level 40, say, with DLC stones, and when that's capped and you found all the Scadu clumps, you would still have roughly the same power output as you do in-game today with just the blessings. Just so there's more stuff to find in the world and you get to improve your weapons some more as well as your character, because right now there's just not enough of that in the DLC IMO. Personally, I would have preferred findable stat increases to unlock more build options and the like. Scadu Fragment of Endurance for 1 free point, Scadu Fragment of Dex, and so on. Maybe these even push the soft cap up so you can still improve your character in the stats that you like at the same time, and there could have been a lot of these to find because there are a lot of stats, and it would always feel like a little bit of cool incremental progress when you find them, but it seems like that suggestion wasn't well received from the first video, or at least didn't hit people as exciting enough. Who knows though, maybe people need to feel it to understand what it would do. One thing I feel way more strongly about, however, is that there could have been far more fragments to find, but this could be coming from a place of disappointment from my first run, something I think most players will share, which was that hoping that every lootable they found was the one thing worth finding and then being let down when it wasn't. Instead, this place is Gordon Ramsay's worst nightmare, a land where everyone knows how to cook. They could have doubled this number for the same boost in power spread over 40 blessings instead of 20, and I think it would have worked. Honestly, for the first time in my life, I'm trying to be conservative here because I think they could have went full Odyssey Moons with these and had one at the end of every side dungeon as well, but hey, let's not go crazy. My last point about these fragments is that I sorely wish they had been split into 2 sets, one for attack power and another for survivability. On my second playthrough of the DLC, I returned to my first ever Elden Ring character and switched him back to using a single longsword that I played most of the base game with at release, until making the switch to big weapons near the end when I got annoyed at the boss design. It was a really cool moment on a personal level for me to be able to switch that guy back to my favorite weapon, but we'll get to that a little later. I wanted to see exactly how many of these fragments I could get along with the new two-handed talisman at the start, and which parts of the DLC world were gated behind dungeons and bosses. Turns out, not much is blocked off. In fact, I think you can set up the map to have access to all of the major bosses simultaneously, except for Radahn of course, and knock them down in any order you like. Without entering any legacy dungeons, you can get 22 fragments. If you dip in and explore, but don't kill any bosses, you can get up to 36, which is enough to have the blessing as high as level 15 before you've solid snaked it up and fought any big boss. And this is also with me not looking at any guides for secret routes I might have missed, so it's possibly even easier to do than I think. To be clear, and I know I should make this kind of disclaimer more often, this is not criticism. Knowing the way on a second playthrough, so you're running around robbing banks all whacked up on Scadu snacks, can be a fun, perhaps broken experience, but is doubtful to be your first experience with the content. So it's a choice. But as I use these fragments, I desperately wish that I could have just applied the damage reduction to make fights easier in a way that made them more forgiving to learn and not accidentally blow my damage potential to the moon and burst everything down. Turns out my weapon for this run made that okay, but with the double colossal build, that was a lot of damage toward the end. I don't see a real downside here because it provides greater player choice and agency in character progression and allows the amount of fragments to find to be literally doubled since there would be the offensive and defensive variants. Who knows, maybe it would have allowed the defensive side of the buff to go even higher since boss damage can still hit real hard at the end even with heavy armor on. My other worry is how do you handle this on those subsequent playthroughs? It's very straightforward to collect all these, and it's not like boring time invested grinding since you just go and pick them up. It takes minutes, not hours. It's like the trek down to Weeping Peninsula for the Sacred Tears and getting golden seeds in the open world, really. Imagine being able to go down there in the base game and then returning to Limgrave at level 120 or something. That's kind of what these fragments can do. It could turn into busy work at the start of runs or a test of willpower to keep yourself from exploring into a big bump in power, but also, is it? I don't know how to judge the balancing here, and I wonder if having more fragments all over the island would have made it easier to just go in whatever direction you like, zone by zone, and know you're getting a pretty even increase with each one. It still is a player decision ultimately, but it might be a difficult one to judge what's best. I also realize I'm kind of just describing a basic leveling system here, so I don't know. On that note, really though, this is a cursed problem and I'm wasting my time talking about it because I'm trying to stay focused on changes that are easier to imagine and implement. In reality, this needed a ton more time and attention from the developers and some big exciting shakeups. And maybe this should have been a separate game mode, or maybe the fragments shouldn't have existed at all and this should have grown into a full sequel. Because these two problems are the minor ones in comparison to the world just having so much damn nothing in it, and I am really curious how this happens. On the one hand, I highly doubt FromSoft was happy with a bunch of the side attractions they had in the base game, like the stupid turtle hunts, the Korok beetle puzzles, and the copy and pasted ruins. Apart from a couple of those beetles, these aren't back really, but there's nothing to replace them. Similarly, I criticized the ending of the game for reusing enemies too much, and for the final trek in the mountains, suggested that having straight up nothing there would have been an improvement for the mood and gameplay pacing compared to what they went with. The key part there, though, is what they went with. Unique, well thought out encounters with fresh enemies would have been preferable. With the DLC having so many stretches of actual nothing, I wonder if they had even more recycling at first and then took it out, or if new content just couldn't be made in time. Or the third option, they couldn't get it to run well enough. This is a much more layered map with more overlapping routes and intricate pathing. It could be that it was a performance problem on consoles, or even on PC. Todd knows the game isn't lacking those already, but my best guess is that this world was so difficult and took so long to develop that they ran out of time to properly fill it with stuff to do. Take for example that the expansion still manages to have so many moments of stunning beauty that you suddenly come across as you exit a cave, or follow a turn, or emerge from a building. From loves these scenic blasts, and so do I. So imagine how carefully the world had to be constructed through planning and editing to allow them to happen while also providing so much freedom in how the player gets around and explores, while also having interconnected routes going from zone to zone, or wing to wing if you subscribe to the idea that the island is more like a big dungeon than a hub world. All the while, these introductions have to be carefully and naturally hidden from the player's view so they still get the perfect shot with the title card as an introduction. Cerulean and Charos is one of the most beautiful double zones that From has made. It had a really enticing, infectious aura when I arrived there, going from the whiplash of repulsion from the mammoth dragon carcass to the alluring beauty of the contrasting flower fields. It felt like a reprieve from the rest of the DLC's mood so far, tucked away as far from the dying tree on the skyline as possible, and made me feel like I was back at the Fountainhead Palace in Sekiro. It was serene in that way. Yet this place is, now that's what I call Elden Ring and crammed with the base game's greatest shits with little else. Another dragon fight, another mariner fight, another deathbird, demi-human queen, oh look a lobster, and there are the annoying hand enemies right next door. I'm not opposed to the game reusing these mini-bosses since many players will be returning to the game just for this DLC, and might have the perspective of, oh yeah, those things, I remember those, sure I'll find another one of those. It's like everything is a remembrance boss. But when that's all there is, it becomes a problem for me. I don't know if that joke is staying in. That was really dumb. Unfortunately, this isn't the worst of it because most of the northeastern part of the map frankly feels blatantly unfinished. The area around the church is the most forgettable part of the DLC to me, but that's only because the very last zone up here was so disappointing that I can't forget it. 2 more tree sentinels, another falling star beast, and the second middle finger ruins that go nowhere. This part, and the other finger ruins to the south, genuinely made me feel like I was playing vanilla World of Warcraft again right at launch and had gotten to one of the zones that didn't have content yet. And some of the bridging paths, when on Torrent, reminded me of the downtime in Shadow of the Colossus, avoiding the obvious pun here. It was such a disappointment to find nothing in these ruins, no secret, no underground legacy dungeons, nothing of substance to match the amazing mystique and the questions the visuals of these areas conjure, both when seen in the distance riding around and when viewed on the map. Nothing. Now let's couple this issue with how much of the baffling low-level drops you find as hand-placed pickups, not random enemy drops. Even the rune amounts are bad here. I would have loved this if there was a way to play just the DLC fresh with a new character from the title menu, but since that's not in the game, this is purely a negative to me. Even the justification of lesser stones being used to upgrade weapons doesn't fly, considering that you can buy them cheaply at the Round Table store. It's the clearest sign to me of all that they rushed in a panic to fill this world with things to find when they realized it was so empty and didn't have time to work on something else. Even the thing From historically does best, better than anyone, suffers. Enemy variety. There is so much reuse of the grave birds and blood fiends in particular, and not much diversity within enemy palettes at each zone. It was quite a surprise to see so much of the same enemy type spammed in some locations. Even the New World boss, the Furnace Golem, was boring to me by the time I watched a second one fall over. I love the visuals of these, but they are pasted too much around the map for how long they take to kill, and I don't recall anything else that was new trying to fill this field boss type of encounter. Let's pump the brakes here. That was 10 or however many minutes of constant criticism. Didn't I say this was my favorite DLC From has made? How can I do this in almost every video? Well, first, I'm the special type of asshole that likes to pick at what they love to make it better. Thoughts and prayers to my children. I genuinely think good criticism is a gift to creatives, and I have benefited so much from it myself in this YouTube video work, streaming, writing, and so much more in my personal life. This isn't just dishing it out, I like to receive it too, and because of that, I know full well that I haven't always provided good criticism to these games. There are some parts in some of my Dark Souls videos in the past that I don't really like anymore. I've been learning as well, and it's a really good thing when you look back at your past self and see shortcomings, because it means you've grown as a person and can see those mistakes now, whereas before, you couldn't. But pushing all that aside, this isn't me trying hard to find a flaw or nitpicking the game to a bald scalp. Speaking of bald, picture a man that has been killing it at the gym recently. Great workouts, nailing the diet side, sleeping well, the muscle like Winter, and Arnold is coming. Delectable shoulder work, impeccable chest progress, and arms to make another man tri-curious. But you know what he's missed week in, week out? His lower body. He has quads, calves, and hams that should be served deep fried at Popeyes. Shadow of the Erdtree is that. It skipped leg day. So while I can admire and enjoy so damn much about all of the greatness in the rest of the DLC, I can't ignore a part of it that does not match up in any sense of the imagination. Just like this envisioned bodybuilder having these really tiny legs with this huge jacked upper body that you can admire big time, but, you know, look down and it's like, hey dude, what happened? I think this is something some people don't understand about some of my past critiques on great games, and it must certainly be my fault. The incredible successes of them are the reason why the shortcomings are so glaring and sometimes unbelievable to me. It's like Shakespeare missing an opportunity for a pun, or Streamer Joe missing an opportunity to dunk on some weebs. Look, we're about to get into the boss talk, which is more positive than the rest, but I do want to make two final points about the DLC's world. The first is that, despite what I said earlier about its structure, I do think there's a lack of that Legacy Souls feel. Shadowkeep is great, but it's at least a full tier below Stormvale Castle and Lindell if you include the sewers, both of which were the highlights of my base game replay. The flooded section was a pleasant callback to Dark Souls 1, but then paid out very little in interesting exploration or even being an achievement to drain. You kind of do it really fast after getting there, with yet another reused boss as the key feature instead of something new and exciting lurking in the water waiting for you. The side dungeons were less frequent and more substantial, so a big thumbs up from me, but I don't know if they'll still be enjoyable on replays. Belarus was a pleasant introduction, but more so for atmosphere than level design, which is similar to my thoughts for part 2 of this later in Millie Rhine. Bad Romance Ruins was quite cool since it was a dungeon on horseback, and that's new and novel, but spent a bit too much time in the same boxy type of tunnels for my liking. And then we come to Midra's Manse, which had an amazing introduction, and then was teensy tiny. This is related to my second point. The overworld is very interesting, but lacks the surprises of the base game. The unexpected regions to the north, the underground map revelation, the meteoric change after Radon, the secret Sifra connections, and how the game feels like it could go on forever. And look, I get it, it's just a DLC, but it's DLC of more Elden Ring, and there is nothing more that screams Elden Ring than these sections in my mind. The Finger Ruins should have been this, but they weren't, which is why the Abyssal Woods is so relevant, because it's where Shadow of the Erdtree does come close. At some point in my exploration, I vividly remember thinking that I was seeing an empty area of the map when I looked down at this. Some inaccessible pit for lore reasons, how poetically apt for how I view the story of these games, with decorative foggy treetops that some other YouTuber will speculate on for hours. So getting here was a great surprise, made even better by what I think was a purely intentional misdirect of a side catacombs being the way you access it. The atmosphere is incredible. I love the gameplay jump scare of getting dismounted like a slap out of nowhere, and the twist of Torrent not coming back after that because he's scared, and then the disappointment cascade began. What are these tutorial messages doing in a secret endgame area in a DLC? Why is there a forced stealth section with enemies that don't look nearly as scary as the introduction here set up? Why is this it? There's nothing else. Two short, not fun stealth sections in a big, empty forest capped off by a small legacy mansion. Then when you're done, you still can't call Torrent to explore it properly because then you'd find out even faster that there's nothing here to see, except another 2 goddamn cookbooks that you have to hoof it around on foot to find, and it's not worth it and so drawn out and so tedious, and here I go, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop. The biggest missed opportunity of the DLC, in my opinion, because the Northeast Zone and Finger Ruins were so lackluster that I can't even think of what they could have been, was not intertwining the outside forest with a supernaturally huge, twisted, Frenzy Flame-themed mansion castle legacy zone, and I can think of no better fuel than this for a different fire. The DLC isn't finished, probably due to time constraints, and this vapid stealth section was a quick fix to fill up space that needed to be filled. This couldn't stay completely empty like some of the other zones. There is a boss here. There needed to be something on the lead up to it. I wish it was something more, and more as I'm writing this, I wish this had been allowed to grow into a fully priced and fully developed Elden Ring 2, or Elden Ring spin-off. This world design deserved to be finished. And honestly, it still does, but I don't see From going there. Do you? I don't have as many negative things to say about the bosses, which is what we're finally going to speak about next, but first, if you'll forgive the indulgence, I have a feeling some people are going to skip to this section in the video timeline chapters, so give me a second to own them. Wow, so just jumping right here, huh? That's all you care about? Boss opinions or bust? Don't care about any of the context this section might draw from the rest of the video? I see boss in timeline, I get neuron activation? Go back to the start and watch the whole thing. Do not collect 200. In a weird mood for this one. Sorry. It's going to get even weirder. Let me try to be really clear at the very start of this. I do not think that the problems that plague too many bosses in the base game have carried over or been made worse in the DLC boss fights. But I also think those problems are still present in the base game. I experienced them again fresh when replaying the game before the DLC, and after doing the DLC, I went back and fought some of them a second time, and I still think those problems are present. The DLC fights are a huge improvement. In fact, I think Shadow of the Erdtree has the best suite of bosses that From has ever made, and that might even hold true when putting whole previous games up against them. It gets a bit silly though because I have to break off DLC packs to do that. I think the Erdtree array is better than the spread found in Dark Souls 3, for example, but if you add Sister Frieda and Ring City's bosses to them, then that's now better than Erdtree's set, I think, if that makes sense. That's pretty high praise still, and I think it's justifiably earned. I didn't expect this to happen, and because of that, I don't quite understand the discourse around the DLC's difficulty at the moment. I wonder if the Spirit Ashes can somehow make it harder in a way, because the bosses have so many AoEs and big combos that can come out of nowhere, that if you have aggro split and you think that it's on your Spirit Summon and not you, you can just get wombo combo down to dead out of nowhere, so maybe that's where some of the difficulty talk is coming from. Or I'm worried it might be my fault a little bit, which is another reason I'm making this video when I really shouldn't be. It's similar to how people were speaking about the End Gauntlet in the base game. I agreed wholeheartedly with the majority back then, but this time I can't see those issues. Bosses are, by and large, exceptionally well animated for telegraphs, have clear punish windows in addition to opportunities to slip in hits in the middle of combos, and don't chain attacks forever in unclear ways. And even when they do have these big, long, spectacle explosion attacks, if you deal with them, they usually have a big punish window as a reward for getting through it at the end without getting hit, knocked down, and having to heal. I know many Elden Ring fans are getting angry that I'm still describing the base game bosses in a negative way like this, but just bear with me, we'll get to it, I promise, and hopefully we can find some middle ground. These 11 bosses felt like the best fights in Dark Souls 3, taken up a notch or two in complexity and dynamic reactions that still felt largely fair and reactable, all with Elden Ring's far better game feel for basic movement and attacks, plus the jump as a new addition for defense and offense. Then on top of that, the variety is here too. It's not just big armored guy with a sword, only the big armor is a bit different and a bit bigger, and sometimes the sword is a hammer, or curved in another direction, or has a little enemy dangling on the end of it, Artorias 3.0, 4.0, 12.0, and so on. They're visually and thematically fantastic, and lots of fun to fight against. My least favorite fights of the main ones are Commander Gaius and Matir, and I don't even think these two are bad, just kind of meh compared to the others. Let's go through them one by one for some commentary, but we'll keep to at most one paragraph for each since we're already 20 minutes over time. I'm so bad at this. How long is left on the video? It's another 20 minutes after this, isn't it? The Lion and Rolana are the only two here that make me worried that I lucked into having a good time with them. For my first few attempts at Lion, I was thinking that all the comments I read about the DLC boss designs were right. It was a difficult boss to read since it's one of those FromSoft classics where the attacks are also movement, and so it can be hard to gauge. But it suddenly clicked with me and I was able to intuitively feel out enough timings that I could rumble with the boss and dance back, kind of like the corrupted tree beast things in the base game. I loved the design, the music, and the elemental switches as the fight progressed, and I hate that the boss was casually repeated in Ra Ra Ruins since this one felt really unique with its fancy cinematic introduction and everything. Not many bosses in the DLC get one like this, and yet this is the one that's repeated for some reason. There were camera problems on this fight though, and you should keep that in mind going forward. Rolana also feels like a dancer, and I'm concerned that I would be whining about this boss if I didn't notice a jump attack heavy made my character stay ducked under many of her counterattack swings. Some good hitboxes on this fight. This helped me play aggressively, but I could be being too hard on myself here since I think I got a decent handle on how this boss would flow between attacks and still have punishable openings. I wish she had a better arena though, since she's better than almost every fight in the base game and is just in this room, hanging out. Oh, and if Rom is going to insist on putting ultimate lol killed you, learn for next time moves on its bosses when they get to low health, I hope they consider reusing Sekiro's life system as a way to smooth out what can feel like bullshit. It's not a big issue, especially since the move looks so cool, but it can feel cheap. Rolana is also the boss that made me wonder about frustrations when fighting in tandem with spirit summons, because when I tried out my Mimic tier here to see how the DLC bosses handled them, it almost soloed it. I started to get really worried that I wasn't going to be able to fight this boss legitimately after this because, yeah, it came really close to killing it on its own. So I don't think the spirit summons are lacking power, it just might be that the boss AI doesn't really work well with them, especially when damage is tuned so highly. Maybe. I don't know. Ramana and Midra came across as the most traditional Souls bosses of the group, well-telegraphed attacks with a few delays and spell-based twists on that basic read and roll foundation. Pretty standard and enjoyable. I think they would have both fit in well in Dark Souls 3, in terms of mechanics at least. My only issue with Midra was that he could sometimes follow his huge frenzy ball nuke with the laser gun barrage right away, and I couldn't see he was charging it because the flames hadn't cleared yet. I don't like this kind of difficulty. I did like that you could see a path through the exploding butterflies that Ramana can carpet bomb the arena with if you want to get back in melee range faster. This was a cool test to read and respond to the situation going on. While Midra looked awesome and had a disturbing introduction, I do think they could have leaned into chaos more for this one, the arena breaking apart or moving to a different floor of the mansion, or a more explosive mini phase 3 near the end. Like maybe you have to burst him down in a panic before he explodes because he's the frenzy flame, whatever. I don't know the lore, but it seems like it would fit there, right? Putrescent Knight is in a similar place, and also a familiar place. Madir is just around the corner, apparently. This is a very long drop as a tension-building introduction into a very large area, only for the boss to ride into view and make you squint in the distance. This is an unexpectedly small adversary that only gets bigger for a few moves, and even then, he's not really that big. It feels like a truly gigantic, monstrous Phase 2 is missing here, and considering how much the DLC does feel unfinished, I wonder if that was the intent, but I still like the fight a lot on my second time through. The double coordinated attack from both the knight and the horse was a highlight to learn how to properly punish, when the horse didn't spawn behind the knight at least. Jumping the fire was awkward, but I appreciated a slightly clearer than usual use of the jump for a fight, and its weapon was a fun nod to Orphan of Cause. Or some say Cosm. For a brief intermission, here are some passing comments on side bosses. I didn't like any of the phantom-like fights, and it's odd to me that they turned some invader encounters into rooms to find instead. The Death Knights were both pretty cool, and it was good to have these duels at the end of some side dungeons instead of a normal enemy with a boss health bar. It makes doing these dungeons again on a second playthrough a lot more enticing. Likewise, Monkey Enya, Blade of Curious George, was a fun surprise at the end of his dungeon. Jory, however, made me miserable, and as a melee build was the boss battle equivalent of trying to punch something in a dream. I do appreciate that it was a more in-depth boss at the end of that dungeon though, and maybe I was just fighting it in the wrong way and I'll have more fun on another playthrough later. At the risk of making the same joke as every other critic and reviewer, Mesmer is simply a mesmerizing fight. This is what Millennia should have been in my opinion. He even has his own firefowl dance that is better than waterfowl in every way, including the visuals. I feel like a king every time I dodge through this and then pause for the setup to punish it. His attacks are fast and varied and can be extended in ways that made perfect sense to me and never felt unfair. I also enjoyed that his Phase 2 was significantly easier than Phase 1 after it became comfortable. The boss has injured himself and tapped into some powerful force that, yes, looks insane and can deal a lot of damage, but that's come at the cost of Mesmer now being left open more often for big punish windows after utilizing this forbidden strength that he's clearly not used to wielding. I like that the boss had to go through that trade-off instead of just getting stronger in every conceivable way, period, and now you have to deal with it, good luck kid, and that meant the fight could front-load its difficulty without becoming frustrating in Phase 2. I am also stunned that these arena-wide snake moves became as readable and inherently understandable as they are after seeing them just a few times. Incredibly well done. I don't have much to say about Commander Gaius. I also don't understand what he's doing here. If it wasn't for the crappy hitbox on his charge, I would be lumping him in with Ramana and Midra as a decent standard fight. Kinda mid. On my second playthrough, I found the best way to deal with this was to get on Torrent at the start, right away when you go through the fog door, in order to outpace the charge, and then try to stay as close to him as much as possible after that, so he just can't do the charge again. When it comes to allowing Torrent to be used in some fights like this, I wonder if they really expect it to just be a way to move faster and then hop off while the enemy boss gets to use their mount for the battle. It works better in the Elden Beast fight now because you can close the gap between you and the boss when it just goes really far away from you, but fighting it staying on horseback the whole time just doesn't work. With fights like this though, Commander Gaius and Radon in the base game, it feels so wrong and unintended to go on foot when the theme/visuals are screaming, mounted combat time, but without a proper dodge on the horse, it can be terrible to try it against a substantial enemy. Even the tree sentinels are pretty bad when fought on horseback. And the night watch guys that you can find in the base game as well. Another mounted enemy, and it's just better to use Torrent to get around and then hop off while they get to stay on their mounts. It just feels like something's missing here. Is it just me? Anyway, I like the absurdity of the full airborne dive bomb on Commander Gaius, and that's about it. Likewise, I have no meaningful commentary for Metyr. The boss is visually interesting in that grotesque way From sometimes does, but looking back, I think I was actually mad that this was all those finger ruins had led to, so I just unga-bunga'd it down. Sorry. Camera was bad here too. For Scadu Tree Avatar, this was inverted. I thought we were going to be able to get into the tree itself and climb around, and grace points were going to appear on parts of the tree on the map since it took up so much space stretching upwards. It was quite sus. It felt like the journey here was leading to that, and Avatar was the entry gate boss, but alas. Luckily, this meant I engaged with the fight properly and had a good time with this dragon that has been turned into a sunflower, has big AoEs, smashes around, breath-like thorn conal attacks, and you are rewarded for hitting the head. Dragon fight. I enjoyed the twist of needing to kill it 3 times, and I think each phase is appropriately squishy to account for that. It also has some odd timings to learn that match its unusual visual design, and it's another boss I think you have to respect and play on its terms to learn to land headshots in order to enjoy it more, but you still have the opportunity to go in and hit the stem if you want, so it's not like you have to do that. I think this boss was great and could have easily ended up as a stupid gimmick fight in a darker timeline. Instead, it flourishes as a great alternative boss type from the usual archetypes, that still functions as a normal fight. It was also nice of From to have Witcher music for this boss. Really makes me feel the overwhelming sense of dread about a ridiculously overdue project weighing down on the fight, just like the dying, overbearing tree above us. Next level gameplay and ludonarrative harmony here, 10 out of 10. Which means we have 2 left to look at, Bale and Radon. Bale was my favorite, and spoilers for a few paragraphs from now, Radon sits at the opposite end on the spectrum from him. Bale is the best dragon boss that From has ever done, and takes Missing Leg Day to a whole new level. Presentation-wise, this is like fighting a rock opera in a thunderstorm. It's undiluted awesome. The visuals don't have to carry here though, because mechanically the boss is also exciting and engaging. Bale is aggressive enough to not feel like an animatronic theme park attraction that you get to hit between his movements, but also not so relentless that it feels like he never stops attacking, although there are some strings in Phase 2 that can go on for a bit if he decides to chain certain attacks back to back. It's never as bad as Midir, who had a habit of doing frontal rampages off screen, sometimes in close succession, or even one after the other, and you just had to watch, which I think I remember complaining about in my Ring City review. I still like that fight, but Bale takes the new Dragon Crown and shows a big improvement on From's part. Best boss of the DLC. This is an easy S tier, but keep the presence of camera issues simmering in the back of your mind for a while longer. Now, you can clearly tell from my footage that I did not completely master these fights, though I did come close to no-hit killing Bale and would have tried longer for that if it wasn't for two moves that I think are too frustrating to deal with right now, the sudden fire breath turns and the quick roar, the former of which I am convinced is bugged, but we'll see how it goes. I very rarely beat a boss hitless on my first or second playthroughs, which is what I base these critique videos on, because I don't think it's a good representation to do a big video on this when you've played the game for 1,000 hours or so. But an important milestone to me when it comes to learning fights is looking back at my time with them and thinking that I could beat them hitless or fully master them if I put in a bit more time to refine my gameplay. This is usually how I feel after beating a harder boss, oddly enough, since I have to learn more over many attempts so I can respond to almost everything in order to get a kill. Meanwhile, the easier bosses can just be burst down sometimes or fall over just after a couple of attempts, even with some careless attacking. Said another way, when I look over my footage and see my mistakes, when I got hit or missed an opening, I can say to myself, damn, I got greedy there, or I mistimed that, I know I can do better, by responding earlier, or using a faster attack on a punish window that I thought was longer, or using a charged attack when I realized the window can be made bigger if I sidestep instead of dodge, and so on. This is the process that I go through. This is why much of my praise of these bosses was samey. This is how Souls combat works to me, and these bosses are variations on that in the same way that an FPS can be boiled down to run, aim, and shoot. Your options are fairly limited, and the gameplay is the learning process of figuring out how to dodge, weave, and punish in the midst of the amazing, spectacular assaults that the bosses throw at you. One of the reasons why combat can still be so satisfying in these games is because of how grounded it is. We're a far cry from how mundane the player moveset was in Dark Souls 1, of course, but that core feeling of being a normal guy with normal moves who still somehow wins against all odds lives on in Elden Ring. We can supernaturally enhance our stats through souls and runes, but our real superpower is perseverance in the face of a much more powerful foe, and the ability, and some might say humility, to take accountability for your mistakes over many attempts and learn from them. Sorry, I didn't mean to become a poet there. I tried to give that up after high school. Speaking of accountability, this is tied to the biggest mistake I think I made in my first video on Elden Ring. I can look at my attempts for some of those bosses and have no idea what I'm doing wrong, even for some moves after I've killed them, and that specifically is the issue I have with those bosses. I didn't speak enough about this learning process being the thing that was too hard. I also didn't qualify that statement enough, and more importantly, I didn't give enough respect to speedrunners and challenge players. Honestly, I didn't think they'd care and know my critique doesn't apply to them and their approach to fights. I said this single line, I know there is a way to do these fights hitless if you're patient enough. And I thought that was all that was necessary. Not so, not by a long shot, and I'm sorry about that, that was wrong of me. Let's circle this back and connect this point to the final fight with Radahn. I really liked phase 1 of this fight. I've heard this cross/attack combo is nigh undodgeable, and my experience was definitely in line with that, but he didn't do it that frequently on me, and I'm guessing it's bugged and hopefully will be patched later. He was a step up in aggression and damage from the rest of the DLC, and had a few moves that were tricky to figure out, but didn't take too long to get down. Then phase 2 happens, and we're snapped right back to the worst parts of the base game boss design. It turns out FromSoft also has a great amount of respect for challenge runners, specifically the ones that play with a blindfold on, because everyone gets to live that experience with Radahn Phase 2. The issue here, much like the blindfold cloth, is threefold. I earnestly, sincerely, hand on my heart, have so much trouble seeing what he's doing for most of this phase. The melee swing after effect light pillar vomit is so obtrusive that it was more of a learning process to play around it not getting in my eyes by keeping it off the screen with movement than it was not getting hit by it with my character in the game. After that, we have some of the most confusing attacks I have ever seen a boss do in a video game. both for how it looks with these projection clones appearing like the light show has become possessed, and for what the expected response is from the player in order to avoid it. Remember, this is in addition to the pillar flashbangs. Lastly, these attacks do a tremendous amount of damage, and Radahn isn't exactly a quick pushover in Phase 1. And so we have, in my opinion, the perfect recipe to make it frustrating to learn. A perplexing mix of poor visibility and experimental moves that require an equal amount of experimenting for responding to them, with the risk of instant death if you don't get it right, and then a fair amount of time to get back to Phase 2 to see it, where you might encounter completely different moves instead for many attempts before you get to practice the original one you were having trouble with. Viewed this way, Radahn has one of the longest runbacks in the series' history before you can potentially make progress on learning him, and that, specifically, is the part I don't like. I also think his arena nuke is about half a second too fast to have a fair shot of getting out of it in time if you're attacking in melee range. Now, this still isn't quite as bad as the worst parts in the base game, unless that triple combo being undodgeable is on purpose. I did eventually, over 5 goddamn hours, learn enough to kill Radahn solo, but I also feel like it was a pretty lucky attempt. One of his attacks didn't hit me because of the lumpy terrain we were on, and it was enough to let me get in a cheeky hit that led to a stagger, and then a kill. Kinda clutch, actually. It was a cool moment. Even so, I think I learned enough of it that I had a workable but suboptimal response for most of the moves. Finally, after all those hours. And I also enjoyed that, like Bale, Phase 2 is a progression on the boss's moveset from Phase 1 instead of a complete replacement. For Bale, it feels awesome, like you made the dragon angry and you forced him to take you seriously, and you've earned his attention and therefore his full power sets. And for Radahn, it's cool how Miquella is complementing Radahn's attacks now instead of entirely taking them over. Weird that there are 2 Miquellas in the game though, huh? Millennia had a Miquella, and so does Radahn? What lazy writing. Meanwhile, if we rewind to that Millennia fight, I still don't know, 2 years later, what the intended response is supposed to be to her doing waterfowl if you're in melee range to avoid all damage. Which means I'm in good company, and right in line with all the FromSoft devs, because they don't know either. Consort Radahn was not this bad. Nothing in the DLC was this bad, but that doesn't mean it was all good either. It's a slightly lesser version of the same issue I said in the first video. It's too hard in a way that's not fun. But am I making the same mistake again by saying too hard, regardless of context? It makes the From fanboy Pokemon start saying their names after all. The reason I feel so compelled to word it this way is because I hate a specific kind of Reddit post. Well, I hate all Reddit posts really, but this one more than others. Hey Reddit, SoulsVet225 here. If you can't tell by my username, I'm a veteran of this series. I even played Demon Souls before Dark Souls came out, unlike you posers who only got into this series with Dark Souls 3. Anyway, the Bale fight sucks, and I say this, again, as a Souls vet. I've beaten Dark Souls 1 at level 1 with an unupgraded club and a banana up my ass. I beat every boss in Dark Souls 3 on my first try. I haven't had any trouble on any of these bosses in years, and somehow, I still love each new release. Anyway, I can't kill Bale, and it's not even that he's too hard or anything, it's that he's too tedious. He's not fun. He's actually pretty easy. It's just so boring that I can't bring myself to kill him, because I'm so bored I get greedy, and then I die, but it's not that it's too hard, it's just so tedious that I play too risky, and yeah, he needs a nerf to bring down the tedium so I can kill him without getting so bored that I die of boredom. It's not too hard though. I'm a Souls vet. Top comments on this post. I agree, and I beat the game's fists only with 2 bananas. Get good. Skill issue. Curse you, Bale. I don't want to be this person. My complaint is tied to tedium. I like the combat in these games, but not enough to do the amount of practice required to learn some of the base game fights. They're not too hard for me to kill, because I know I could just use spirit summons, or co-op, or go for magic, or put on talismans that are based around the weaknesses, or anything like that. They're just not fun to learn in the way that I like to play. And my goal isn't really to kill the boss, it's to have a fun and interesting time while fighting them. But that doesn't mean they're not too hard, and I want to own that. Challenge runners collectively did enough labbing hours on these fights to cure cancer, and then come out with reports and guides on all the intricacies present in them. No, this move actually does have a telegraph. If you look at the boss's left nostril a quarter of a second before the attack comes out, you clearly see an upward twitch, and that's your cue to roll. If it's the right nostril though, then you need to do a jumping attack, and then you get a punish. So make sure you keep the boss's nose on the screen at all times. Or, during this frenzy of 15 attacks in a row, there are 2 player-shaped holes under these swings that you can ballerina pose through, and another that you have to hit the left stick on to do a duck in order to get some free hits in if your weapon swing is sub 1 second. Charge heavy afterward for a free stagger. And yeah, I'm exaggerating, just a little bit for fun, but only because I think this kind of thing is awesome. Kudos. Sincerely, I get to have only little fragments of this kind of feeling when I discover new ways to punish fights on attempts and replays years later. But that's my central point here. I discover them. I want to do this myself, on my own terms, with my own process, without guides or dozens of hours of my time on just one fight, and that was my central criticism that I didn't make clear enough in the base video. Some of the fights are too hard, sometimes for different reasons, for me to be able to do that without Google. Two examples of how I got into this myself and really had a good time in the DLC can be found with Radahn and Bale. Elden Ring Ganondorf can sometimes follow up this jumping attack with another jumping attack, and there was no discernible reason that I could figure out for why he would do this only sometimes. But it didn't matter because it was timed so well that I could do a jump and not have to commit to my attack until I was sure he wasn't going to do the follow-up. And if he did, I could just land, roll, and jump again this time with the attack queued. It was one of my favorite things to learn in the DLC and added to that flow state idea of the player reacting to the boss's reaction of what you're doing. I could anticipate this behavior and hold the attack until the very last second and get my damage in no matter what. Bale, on the other hand, shows how much better the DLC fights can handle changes in a boss's behavior based on the player's positioning. It makes perfect sense that if you're closer than usual to the dragon's head while he's breathing fire, that he would cancel it into another attack, instead of stupidly continuing the fire while you just wail at his eyes. Just like exhaling fire at the ground below his torso would be a perfectly reasonable response if you're trying to stay under his claws for free damage. These make sense to me in a way that some responses and extensions in the base game did not, and they're also timed better for proactive play in my opinion. I understand more now what people were saying about these bosses being awesome if you put more time into learning them in this way, because the DLC provided enough of that experience with challenging encounters that were far more approachable and fun to learn, undoubtedly with a ton of refinement in punish windows and movement for me to get into when I try them again later on more playthroughs. The fights I didn't like in the base game didn't allow this for me, so while I am sure I would have enjoyed fighting them in this way if I put all that time in, would that enjoyment have been enough to justify the time investment? I didn't think so back then, and I still don't now. It's like crushing a pineapple with your bare hands. The juice ain't worth the squeeze. Relatedly, some people might be confused why I say I can appreciate this stuff while not wanting to do it myself. Something doesn't make sense here, right? Well, for me, it's like being awestruck at some of the techniques used in Celeste speedruns or the Mario 64 speedruns as an example. The Hazy Maze Cave Red Coin Star in particular is an amazing clockwork-like procedure. It's almost surgical that some runners can do flawlessly. The amount of work that went into fine-tuning that and then practicing it to perform it live each run is astonishing. I love seeing it every time, but I have no desire to do that myself or put the time in to learn, and I doubt I would enjoy a game built around demanding that. While the Elden Ring bosses I have issue with aren't close to that, of course, they are still too unintuitive and too unfun for me to commit to learning fully, especially when placed next to the Shadow of the Erdtree set, because here's a group of bosses that do it better in every way for me. That does not mean I don't understand why other people may like the fights in the base game still. But with that said, I also have to clap back a bit here because I'm not convinced the playstyle challenge runners found for these bosses is actually intended. DLC content in FromSoft games is usually a step up in difficulty and complexity, not down. And since you can burst the base game fights much easier, I can't stop myself from thinking that some of the moves they have are just overtuned or poorly animated, like Radahn's cross slash here in the DLC, and Millennia's waterfowl in the base game, and some crafty players found ways to play around them. It is not reasonable to me to conclude that this is the intended way of beating things when it's not communicated at all, while the game tutorializes way more obvious stuff like the weak points on these DLC enemies and the stealth section, and again, that the DLC bosses do not explore this design any deeper as the intended method of learning them. This constant dance where there are no openings and you just have to hit them between their combos. That isn't in the DLC really. They're back to way more reasonable openings. I think it more likely that the base game was just rushed in places and imbalanced with the back end of bosses. I wonder if they weren't all stacked together in a tight clump at the end, with Fire Giant also being pretty bad in his own special way, that I wouldn't have found as much to complain about. Remember, and I really hope this doesn't come across as gloating because I don't intend it to be such, we now have torrents in the Elden Beast fight when some fans just spent the last 2 years swearing up and down that it was for sure a part of the legendary vision of the game that we just didn't understand, it's beyond reproach, and so on. Either they legitimately forgot and had to wait for 2 years to slip the change in with the DLC so it doesn't become the focus of too many conversations, which absolutely worked if that was the intent, Or they couldn't get arguably the most important boss fight in the game, it's the climax, working properly until now, and just shipped it as is and left it for 2 years. Either way, it's a huge WTF. Similarly, the Great Runes are still objectively bugged to this day and do not grant any buff or benefit whatsoever without having a rune arc activated. Or, far worse, they were never supposed to, and they just can't be bothered fixing a single sentence in a tutorial. How much more in the base game is not working properly in this way, or just needs some tweaks, and From just isn't doing it? If they can't find the time or willpower to update a sentence, how must they feel about really complex issues like boss timings or telegraphs or animations that maybe aren't working properly? It's hard to take this seriously, even though I swear to God I really try, when some people take these talking points and run with them so far that they'll defend Waterfowl Blade when, again, it doesn't even have a developer-intended way of dealing with it when up close. And I will die on this hill. I will be enshrined on this hill. You can make a whole Mausoleum Legacy dungeon with my triggered spirit as the boss on this hill. To reiterate, it is very difficult to have a conversation about any possible troublesome moves in the game when the argument is, because you can Xbox 360 around her at the start of Waterfowl or throw a frost pot, that it is technically avoidable, therefore skill issue, therefore get good, therefore stop yapping. It is the inquisitive players that deserve the respect here for finding a way to out-bullshit this bullshit. Not from making an attack that 99.99% of the player base will never learn how to deal with on their own, so the game comes across as more difficult than it actually is. And it seems like From understands this too, because the DLC is almost entirely devoid of this method of difficulty. To cool down from this, I want to be clear in saying that I'm not proposing the way some people have found to engage with these bosses isn't legitimate or not fun. It's just maybe not intended, and those are two different things. From someone who is just starting to dabble in no-hit runs, all the way up to Ongbal, hope I pronounced that correctly, schooling every boss in the game in multiple ways to the point that you start feeling sorry for them. Mad respect. Deep respect. I hope that the DLC fights aren't too easy for you after all the base game ones, because I want you to have a great time with the game too. But that doesn't mean that the base game bosses weren't too far for most players to learn, which seems to be the case since most people agreed with my original critique for quite a while after it came out, and it wasn't until they played the game many more times or looked up guides to learn the fights that they came back and said, you know what, I kind of like the boss design now. I think this new DLC set of bosses is in a great place between base game Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3. Most players aren't going to have to resort to looking up guides and can learn the fights themselves. It might take a while because they're hard, but they can still do it. This is a wonderful happy medium. Except for Radahn Phase 2. I don't think I'll ever bother fighting him again. Here are some more mistakes in the original video before we wrap this up. There could be a couple more, but these are the ones I'm sure of. I was way too hard on Mohg. I think I was getting fatigued with the game's length by then, or annoyed by the unavoidable damage transition, or I was just playing it too much for the video. That can happen sometimes. He's a pretty good fight. Sorry. I should have researched iframes on the jump. I assumed that some attacks were flagged to not deal damage if the player was in the air, not that the jump would remove the player's lower hitbox as an alternative iframe type move. Apparently there are also some attacks flagged for ground damage, so they do exist as well. Maybe. The game apparently does not have input reading. The bosses are just capable of responding to the first frame or first few frames of some animations, like using your flask. I don't really understand why this matters though, because the end result is still the same when it comes to gameplay. I can hit a button and the boss responds so fast that it feels like I was in control of them for a moment, but it's not input reading. Maybe input reading is such a maligned term in some groups that it really pissed some people off to hear it said like that. If that's the case, then I am sorry. I know it's annoying for terminology to be misused as well. To close out the video, I have two topics left that I want to discuss. The first is to state plainly that I am now excited for another game in the series again. The DLC showed me enough progression on boss design that I'm no longer disinterested or disheartened by where the series seems to be going, and it's like a shadow hanging over the base game now instead of the other way around. But I do have a couple stipulations on that, and I still think, as good as these fights were, that there's something far better that could be made with all of Elden Ring's parts. By now, some of you are probably wondering why I haven't brought up the deflecting hard tier yet. It's a wondrous physic flask buff thing that grants you a temporary Sekiro-type perfect guard for about the duration of a boss battle. I haven't tried this extensively yet because I wasn't sure if the fights would be balanced around it, and I knew I'd end up making some video about them or talk about them at some point, and I wanted the base experience and not this modified one. Either way, it makes me quite hopeful about some more options coming in the next game. I wish that it had been a foundational power added to the player character throughout the DLC, so I would know for sure fights were fairly built around it. Maybe some system of replacing body parts, like a second set of armor, so you could have a Mesmer type eye that shows you the boss's stagger bar, another eye for telegraph symbols for whether an attack can be jumped over or has to be perfectly blocked or parried. Your legs could give you a double jump and a stomp on an enemy head after jumping over some attacks to deal high stagger damage. And what if your left arm got replaced and you got a grapple line for quick world navigation? Or the game still doesn't use some of its systems enough. The depth is there, and some players can find it after digging for a while, but I don't think we should have to. Imagine how miserable Sekiro would be if the perilous warnings were stripped away. How much tedious, protracted learning about what attacks can be jumped, demand a perfect parry, Mikiri countered, or have to be dodged or ran away from. That's what Elden Ring is right now. Or for an example that's in the game already, imagine how much unnecessary tedium would be added if the glowing critical hit points were removed from bosses after knocking them down, and you had to play a guessing game of find the weak point over several attempts and several knockdowns before learning where you have to stand. Or with some fights concluding with insecure dejection that they simply don't have one and you can't do it no matter how hard you try, and it may have taken a considerable amount of your time to learn that, and you always second guess yourself every single time you knock them down because maybe you just haven't found it yet. Instead, by providing information about attacks and states like this to the player, they can be used far more frequently and demand many different reactions from you and drastically enhance the flow state of combat. It's one of the reasons why Sekiro is so good, and while Elden Ring doesn't, and shouldn't, be exactly like that, it could take many of those systems and use them in its own way. I appreciate that some amount of work went into encouraging me to use jump more, particularly with fire-based attacks, as a defensive option for these fights, but there's no way in hell I'm going to spend so much time meticulously testing boss moves for jump openings. As I said above, it's not worth it to me, but I still know the potential is there for a second telegraph defensive response because Lies of P is so fantastic. So why isn't From doing it when they will add this weird band-aid-like deflecting buff? Well, hold on, let me make sure I've got the pin out of this hand grenade. It may surprise some of you to know that the opening of this video is not a joke to some people. I can guarantee that there are some fanboys that clicked, listened to that opening, and went wide-eyed while saying, wow, so he just admits it. Maybe they even commented before getting through the opening. Maybe you can find them below. People think that way about me and anyone else that criticizes Daddy FromSoft because that's how extreme the discourse has gotten around these games. Some people really do think I want to have my perspective ingrained on the masses and infects all conversations as an objective take, even though I've never done that and have gone out of my way so many times to explicitly state otherwise. So anyway, let me do it for the first time then. If you ever find yourself interacting with a FromSoft fan who just dismisses criticism and conversation with get good, skill issue, yapping, etc., then I want this proposal to be the default mindset going forward. You need to ignore them and remind yourself that you are dealing with either 1, a kid. Kids are allowed to be dumb. They get a pass. Just ignore them. They'll grow up, hopefully. 2, a troll. Get good never used to be that serious. It still isn't to some people. We all do a little trolling. Ignore them. 3, a loser. Someone who actually, literally, no exaggeration, is a full-grown ass adult and thinks that their biggest accomplishment in life is beating a Dark Soul and sees nothing wrong with that. Ignore them. I am breaking my keyboard to quickly type a follow-up. If any discussion happens at all, you are not talking to this kind of person. So don't ignore them, well, based on this advice at least. I do not want to be seen as trying to dismiss criticism because the exact opposite is my whole point here. People who disagree with my takes and put work into rebuttals and defense of a game they like, awesome shit, keep on it. Really, people who like what I don't like obviously deserve to have their argument out there, and vice versa. That should go without saying, and I could very well be wrong about where I want a game to go, and most people would prefer otherwise. But these toxic assholes that have latched onto this series, probably because it's the first time in their life that something held them accountable, so now they view a game dev as a surrogate parent, need to stop being a dominant voice in all of these conversations. I love FromSoft. They are probably my favorite developer. Do you know who else I used to love? Bethesda. Do you know what the climate of gaming discussions was like about Bethesda around the time Skyrim came out in 2011? Very much like what we have about FromSoft today. If you're a bit younger than my average demographic, it may absolutely shock you to learn that people were scared to criticize Bethesda when Fallout 4 came out. That game was when things finally started to turn for them. But yeah, Bethesda, the clown dev of the industry today, people were scared to criticize them back then. Game journalists had negative feedback, and man, the fear and backlash they weathered. That doesn't mean people didn't have problems with Bethesda's games before this, it's just that when it was voiced, it was often swiftly extinguished by the fanatics that didn't realize they were doing more harm than good with their toxic positivity. Elden Ring, as I view it, is FromSoft Skyrim. Congratulations, Todd, you got another one out there. Not because it's open world, but because it feels to me that their player base at large is finally starting to get tired of the same problems being in the games that have been there from the start. Or maybe it's the huge influx of a new audience since Elden Ring was a staggering, and truly deserved, mainstream success. And I'm not talking about much more subjective things like boss design here when it comes to these problems. I'm talking about performance issues, especially on consoles, technical limitations, unfinished sections, a camera that is sometimes worse than it was in games they themselves released years ago, online guides being a requirement for basic boring quest content, and the beginning of memes ridiculing how they keep reusing the same themes and imagery. Miyazaki, forgive me, not to mention even the lore people seem to be disappointed in the DLC's ending because there was nothing there, and they're usually the champions of seeing so much when there's nothing. I love the Bale fights, but how is the boss designed to actively get so close to me that the camera unavoidably clips inside his body? It's like it's a part of the fight, and I have to hope I'm not getting attacked while I fix it. Why are giant enemies still impossible to see one up close when Sekiro already used a simple fix for this? Do you know how much better Dancing Lion looks when the camera is pulled back a bit, and how much more fun it is to engage with his moves with that perspective? Why are gank fights still horrible for off-screen telegraphs when Ring City already had a solution? Or a better question, why are gank fights? Why are bosses so poorly tested that Bale can become... Zuko, Bender of Fire, and make this happen? This is a move he does about a third of the time at the start of every attempt as you walk through the fog door. Either this wasn't tested nearly enough, or this is actually intentional, and we can look forward to seeing more of it, in which case I rescind my interest in any subsequent Elden Ring games. FromSoft is amazingly talented, and they make fantastic games, but they clearly have a few blocks here and there. And the reason why I think they struggle to consistently fix things and improve, particularly on small stuff that should be the easier tweaks to make, is the same reason why Bethesda insulated themselves from all criticism and we ended up with Starfield. I know firsthand as a creative person, although I'm far from any of the subjects we're discussing, to be clear, how difficult it can be to sift through feedback for the stuff that's coming from a pure place. Even if you disagree with it, or it's not even applicable, at least it's honest and you can see something in it. Imagine going from feeling like everyone loves what you produce and having such a loyal, fervent fan base that you see defenses of all your design decisions in every discussion online. Guess things can't be so bad, huh? It's all acceptable. Look at the discussion, it's there. And then within one game, you see that twist on its head. The dam breaks, and now it's a flood embittered by years of being silenced by fanboys that may turn around and join in with this new wave. Because when the tide turns on this, it can often be more fun to troll and go along with it. And there was never much critical thinking going on there to begin with. Just yelling at people to shut up, or get good in this case. I said earlier that I didn't want to come across as gloating about the torrent change to Elden Beast, and it's mostly for this reason. From should be celebrated and encouraged for fixing their games post-release, and not somehow feel like they're betraying their fans who are scrambling like angry wasps in every conversation to defend everything they're doing. Even some of the things From themselves may think are lackluster or know are broken and look awkwardly at the defensive at best, or become confused and doubtful about their own decisions at worst. This shouldn't be seen as a gotcha, aha, see, there are some big mistakes in your game, I knew it, and instead a casual, yeah, of course there would be some errors in a game this huge. Fix it and then fix more, please. Don't feel bad or ashamed or anything like that. It should not have taken 6 games and a movie for a new item tab to be added. Do you want FromSoft to end up with a Starfield of their own? That may be unthinkable to you, but if we rewound time and spoke to the biggest Skyrim enjoyers of late 2011, Starfield launching in 2023 with some of the exact same problems that were in Oblivion would have been just as inconceivable, because that's where we are now. Some issues are starting to pile up, and if they are continually suppressed for long enough, it'll be the same explosive release we saw after Fallout 4. Toxic positivity transmuted to toxic negativity at the same potency and with the devs just as confused. I don't think I'm capable of swaying any fanboy's mind on their attitude toward criticism on FromSoft, or anything, but I do think I have a tiny chance of making it so enough people dismiss them from the conversation and stop being afraid of the skill issue choir that shows up every time the discussion on these games dips toward neutral. And then some of my favorite games can become even better, and one of my favorite game devs won't end up releasing an embarrassment. We need to let FromSoft get good. That's all. Thanks for watching. Okay, so this is the current release candidate. Just make sure that you remove this part and any other changes that you want to make from the rest of the video before you send it back. And if I get the green light, then I'll put it on the channel and it'll be uploaded as soon as possible. As per our email and our discussions that we had, I went back and I added more negativity. I'm surprised you said that, but I added more negativity as you wanted to make the positivity seem more believable and genuine. So I did that. I don't know if I went too far on it, but if I did, let me know and I can scale it back a little bit. I doubt you'll want it to go even higher. We'll see. Yeah, I think that's about it. Please let Miyazaki-san know that I miss my children very much and I love them and I look forward to seeing them again after this is resolved. Thank you.